here it is. What we have before us here is the best cast iron small block Chevy intake ever made. The best. It's a pretty strange looking piece. What it actually is it's based on the old Z-28 intake manifold. They put them on the 302s, 67, 68, 69, and 70. They put them on the LT-1s. I think they used them up to about 71, 72, and then they pulled the plug on them, stopped using Holley carburetors. In 73 they started using the quadrajet. But the LT-1 had a 780 Holley. The 302s did also. So this was GM's way. This never came stock on a vehicle. This was GM's way of getting around a rule. So back in the day, oval track racing was pretty popular, especially in the South and the Midwest. Dirt track racing and short track racing, big shit. Still is pretty much, but they had funny rules trying to even out the playing field and keep cost in line in the lower classes, but it didn't usually work out that way. But GM started making these intakes here in 93. This is a bow tie dual plane. This particular unit was cast in November 9th, 1993. And there's the part number. It's 140962242. You see the bow tie here. So there's how you identify it. It is a GM intake, but it just didn't come stock on nothing. And where it differed from the LT-1 intake, one is it's cast iron. It weighs a fucking ton, but it's just a material difference. The runners and shit are all the same. They took the old LT-1 intake molds and just modified it. They made it where you could use a quadrajet or a Holley. These outer ones here are the Holley, and the inners are the quadrajet, obviously. And then they opened up the plenum here, modified the plenum so a quadrajet would work with it. These things have a big ass plenum, and they're big. They got some big fucking runners too. Oh, sharp edge there needs to be knocked down. Yeah, they're deep and large. So you can bolt a quadrajet straight on here. But they were popular in the oval track classes that required you to run a cast iron intake manifold. So GM come out with these, and people started using them in the hobby stock, and street stock, and shit like that. But then a lot of tracks started cracking down and saying you couldn't use these. You had to use an intake that actually came on a production engine. So these got outlawed. So they pretty much pulled the plug on them back in the 90s. I mean, there's still small tracks and shit to this day where people run these and get away with it, where they're more lax on the rules. But most of your bigger tracks and shit that are strict, these are outlawed. So then GM had all these fucking cast iron LT-1 intakes, and nobody to buy them, so the boating community got turned on to them. And they started putting on boat engines like Mercury Marine, Volvo Penta, Mer Cruiser. But they only came on high performance boat engines. You know, they had like 383 Magnum boat engines that were like 425 horse and shit. And this is the intake that came on. There were others, but they were pretty high performance boat engines. They were top of the line boat engines. But a guy can build a small block, build a 350 or a 383 or 400 or whatever. Paint the heads orange. Paint an intake like this orange. Throw a modified quarter jet on it. Throw some stock valve covers with some spacers under them. Make it look like a stock engine, but really have some thump. These intakes here, I've seen a couple of them float on benches. And from what I've seen, they flow in the 250 to 260 range CFM, depending on whose bench it's on and which runner you're flowing. But you know, they're 250 to 260 CFM range, and that's more than about any other dual plane intake made. I seen a 400 small block built with one of these, an oval track, a dirt track engine years ago, and it made over 560 horsepower with one of these intakes here and a solid flat tappet cam. I believe it had some kind of cast iron EQ heads on it that were approved. But it was over 560 horsepower with this nugget. But they like them on marine engines because fucking like salt water eat aluminum up pretty quick. Even fresh water, it's best to run antifreeze with your aluminum over like long-term storage and shit. Straight water will eat them up. So the cast iron is less susceptible to that. And it's a hell of a lot harder to strip out bolt holes. So you get one of these intakes, all that shit's generally going to be perfect condition. I paid $75 for this fucking intake. I felt pretty good about it. I didn't need it for nothing, but couldn't pass it up. I'll build a sleeper engine with it. Because these things, I think these are better than a Performer RPM, actually. I got one of them sitting right here. And you can start comparing the two. The fucking runners on this bow tie intake are way bigger. Even the fucking ports. The port exits, they're all big. And they're at least a 1205 entrance. There's exhaust crossover. Person be best to block that off or fill it. Fill it with molten aluminum would be the best way to go. I got it on this wood here because it's got this exhaust crossover there, hangs down, makes it sit funny. So try to level it out. Hey, compare the size of the runners to this Performer RPM. It's fucking David and Goliath. These old RPMs are, a lot of people love them. A lot of people are fucking sheep, and they hear something's good, then they automatically jump on board. So they've sold 1 million of these fucking things. But they're not the only intake in town, really. There's others as good or better. I think them new AFR dual planes are a little better than RPM. These fuckers here are ancient. It's based on a late 60s, early 70s GM intake. And they're still kick-ass. This is what the old Holley, they had a Holley Contender, which they changed the name on it several times. They called it a Contender at one time. They called it a Street Dominator at one time. But what it was a big dual plane intake based on an LT-1 intake, just made by Holley. And those are some of the best dual plane intakes ever made. This fucker, it's durable. Just need to lay some paint on it. I ain't gotta paint it until I decide which engine I'm gonna put it on and whether I'm gonna paint it orange or black. But I'm gonna build a stock looking engine that puts out 500 horsepower and disguise it as a stock engine. Just something to fuck with. Look at the size of them runners compared to that RPM. You know, RPM was pissant by comparison. Right there's a good fucking shot. Them runners are fat all the way through. They'll move some air through them. And that plenum on that RPM is dinky as hell by comparison. That fucker there's cavernous. This fucking mammoth cave in there. One person do a little work with a die grinder and a carbide bit, improve it slightly even better, but like there's a ridge right here. I'm probably gonna smooth out, get rid of that. The old LT-1 intakes, they had the divider here recessed down about 3/8 of an inch or so. But if you're gonna run a Holley on one of these, best thing to do is just throw you a 1 2-inch spacer on there. And there's your split. That'd pick you up possibly 10 horsepower, theoretically. Definitely won't hurt. That's the way I'm going to run it. Of course, I'm going to run a Holley double pumper on it. Or if I'm trying to make it look like a stock muscle car engine, I might run a 750 Holley vacuum secondary on it, just one that's tweaked. I'll probably end up painting it orange. Probably paint the fucking spacer orange too, just to make it blend. Put an old late 60s thermostat housing on it. Paint it orange. Build a sleeper engine. Tell everybody it's a stock 350. It's all stock except for the headers and the exhaust. That's why it sounds like that. And it needs a tune-up. It has a pretty rare intake these days. They only made them back in the 90s. And after all them sanctioning bodies started banning them, they pretty well went to the water. So they put them on some bolts, but I don't think they are now because the heads changed bolt patterns and shit. And the newer bolt engines use the Vortec heads, so these are obsolete. Which this intake takes a standard old school bolt pattern. They have one that takes the TBI style bolt pattern, and then they have one that takes the old style early bolt pattern. That's what this one is. So it'll fit pretty much all old school type bolt pattern heads. Them things were expensive as hell when they came out. I remember looking through the old PAW catalog, big fat ass fucking speed parts catalog I used to buy a bunch of shit from. That fucking catalog was like 3 inches thick. It was like a New York phone book, but it was all high performance auto parts for sale. If they didn't have it, it probably didn't exist. But they sold a lot of GM bow tie race parts, and that was the first time I ever seen one of these intakes, and that was back about 93. I think I still have that catalog, but these things were, it seemed like they were $200 or $300 back in 93, so they wasn't cheap. But there wasn't many people buying them unless you were out, had you a hobby stock dirt track car. It was about the only people using them. But they dusted off the old LT-1 molds and made a run of these things with it, so they are made with the actual LT-1 molds. They just modified the top and drilled the holes for the quarter jet. It's kind of a rare intake now. You could find them a little easier years ago. But there it is, the big bow tie dual plane. Best one they ever made.